Hello guys, welcome back to Custom Gamer. My name is Des, and this is the show where we talk about level design while playing cool maps. Today we're checking out another map from BeginningVille, the mapping competition held over at planetphillip.com, where authors had to create an intro to a mod that's going to be broken up into sections over the course of this competition. So today we're going to look at a map, Retreat by Alistair Toft, aka MisterAddy. Let's jump right into the game, shall we? So, once again, if you're not familiar with the Planet Phillip competition, it's a three-part competition, and in each part Phillip gives out instructions on what kind of general principles of the mod, what should be in the map to kind of keep it cohesive between authors, but it's fairly open-ended. Authors have a lot of choice of what they want to do. In part one, they kind of just have to create a kind of feeling of travelling from somewhere to somewhere else, and there has to be some obstacles in the way as they travel. So now we're all up to speed. Now you can see here we've got some of this kind of superimposed text on the world here. This is something we've seen in a couple of other mods. The one that springs to mind is of course Hatch 18 by E40. Used a lot of this kind of stuff. It's not quite implemented quite right here because you can there's actually collision on the text, and you can kind of jump on top of it and it'll block physics and all this kind of strange stuff. I always think that if you're going to have these kind of superimposed elements on the worlds, things like text and otherworldly things, they should be completely non-interactive. Although saying that though, it could be quite hilarious if you have some kind of like interactive credit sequence in your map where you can kind of clamber around on the text as it goes up the screen or something. That could be quite interesting. But yeah, here it doesn't feel quite right. You can I always think like it should fade out or something when the player gets close to it, so you can never actually quite touch it. So yeah, I don't mind it being there, it's just the implementation doesn't feel quite right. As you can see now, we've got a fairly competent chase sequence here actually. That's something I mentioned quite a lot in other videos, is that chase sequences can be pretty hard to get right because either the player doesn't run and thinks they can fight, or you know, there's just not enough urgency. There's always things that can go wrong when you're doing a chase sequence, and for the most part this map does a fairly good job. It's mainly because you don't have a weapon, so your only real choice is to run or die. And it's got some unfortunate things like here that you notice the door behind us is now locked, which unfortunately it kind of destroys the chase sequence in a way, because suddenly there's just absolutely no danger until we come down here. But again, here you can see we've still got no weapon, and of course our hunter forces us into the event. Maybe if we had a weapon you'd possibly think that you could survive here, but just got to keep on running. I mean, for the most part it's quite good. I like the fact that when you're in vents and things like that, you can see just tiny little scripted events in other rooms, which is quite a nice little feature. And I like the fact that when you first come out of the starting room, you've got all the rebel forces fighting the Combine, which gives you a chance to kind of run away from the Combine without them focusing on you entirely. So yeah, I quite enjoyed this first section of the map. It's just a shame that that door had to lock behind you when we were talking to that rebel in the stairwell. Would have been quite nice if the Combine had burst through the door and forced us onwards. So here we are. So again, as I was talking about in the intro, a lot of the maps in this pack feature vehicles in some way, because it's kind of a nice way to travel around. So we've got a nice kind of open air segment here. I'm terrible in this car. I can't even reverse into enemies to kill them. It's not good. So we'll stop trying to be clever and just go forwards, I suppose. And again, here we've got a nice kind of chase sequence style event. It reminds me a lot of the airboat sequence actually, where you're kind of going down the canals, dodging rockets fired from Combine APCs and everything. It's very good. I like this section a lot. And again, when you're driving a car like this, things like the amount of space you have to move around in is really important, and I think the author gets it just right here. There's enough obstacles to make it interesting, but you've got enough space so it doesn't become annoying to kind of hitting everything every 5 seconds and not being able to get up any speed. It's a very common occurrence in some custom maps, but he does a nice job here of just creating a nice feeling of dodging between trees without actually, you know, it being frustrating. There's a couple of missed opportunities still here, so you notice this kind of an obstacle we've reached, and I'm guessing a lot of players would just drive straight through here, but because I derped it and hit the wall, I thought I'd get out and have a look if there's anything hidden around here, and unfortunately there isn't. And I think there's a real missed opportunity. It would have been nice if there was like a hidden rebel cache here or something like that, so you can pick up some weapons and items. That would have been really nice. So let's carry on. Yeah, the mod just does a really nice kind of spectacle of, you know, like stunting over fences and all this kind of stuff. It does it really well. Then we've got a kind of precision driving segment here where you're dodging the mines. Again, that's something that could have been really annoying if there'd been too many mines or you had to stop and move them or something. Just driving through them quickly but carefully like that, it feels really good. Perhaps if you had a gravity gun there could have been some gameplay where you had to get out of your vehicle and clear some mines away, but we don't, so let's carry on. Again here, another missed opportunity to hide some items around, I think. It's kind of a common theme throughout this map, but there's really no point in exploring because there doesn't seem to be anything to find, unfortunately. I like how we use the grubs here. You kind of follow the grubs to get through the cave. It's a nice little bit of breadcrumbing to kind of pull players along. And we're taken down by the Strider. I do like that scene. I think slow motion is kind of strange used in Half-Life 2 maps. Sometimes it doesn't feel right because, you know, time slows down but the sounds don't, and you know, kind of just feels a bit odd. But I think for small little sequences like that, it can actually be quite nice. I'm trying to think of another map that used slow motion like that. At the end of Union, where the Vortigaunt gets killed and it goes into slow motion, that felt quite nice as well. But yeah, it's typically used sparingly in Half-Life 2, and see why, because it's only useful in very specific situations, I suppose. So this area is really pretty. I do like this area a lot. And again, so we're still travelling. We've come across a few obstacles, some of which have been surmountable, things like the fences that we had to get over with the car, and some insurmountable, for instance the Strider. So, following very closely to the design brief put out by the competition so far. Done a good job. Now again, I wanted to kind of explore around here, see if there's any like supplies hidden behind waterfalls, you know, the level designer trope. If there's a waterfall, there's probably something behind it. But unfortunately no, I found a giant clip brush but no items. A shame. Yeah, I mean, as nice as this area is, it may as well just be a corridor, because there's only really one way to go. There's nothing to find, nothing to explore. You may as well just go in a straight line, which is perhaps a bit of a missed opportunity. So I suppose you could call this area the second act of the mod, because the gameplay focus kind of changes from very fast-paced Michael Bay action scenes to a very kind of slow and deliberate plod through these mines, which is it's a fairly nice change actually. And we find Norman the gnome, which is critically important to progression. If you missed the gnome, then you were playing the map wrong, and I feel sorry for you. This is the beginning of an epic story. And now you must die. The vacant stare of the gnome just strikes terror into the heart of all my enemies. So this is a case of players don't look up enough. And when I do look up, I kind of see the solution to this little puzzle here. So this is just a nice simple little thing. Yeah, again, getting players to look where you want is a very common problem in game levels. Generally, the kind of heavy-handed approach most games uses, they literally take control of the camera and force you to look at something, which I'm not too keen of. I think too many games kind of do this. They grab you by the neck and shove things down your throat. It's always nice if you can kind of suggest to the player where to look, and it's pretty hard to do, honestly. A good technique which people have suggested, and I've kind of noticed in a lot of games, is kind of movement in the environment is a great way to kind of get the player to notice something, especially in games like Half-Life 2, where typically environments can be very static with not a lot of moving parts, so when there is movement it kind of draws the player's attention to it. Of course, this all goes out the window of kind of newer games. Like, I think a great example is perhaps Crysis 3, you know, where you've got all the grass moving around, kind of, you know, tarpaulin flapping around in the wind, and it's everywhere, all over every level. There's just movement everywhere, so it probably wouldn't work too well there. But in games like Quake, Half-Life, you know, older games which perhaps couldn't handle the amount of movement in the environment, you know, that's a great way to do it. So we see here Norman's sniffing out all the secret areas for us. I'm definitely glad I brought him along. As you can see here, he's spotted a zombie for me. Kind of threw himself at it, but unfortunately gnomes, you know, they're a bit short. Didn't quite have the oomph to reach him, otherwise it would have been a one hit. But he tried. That's all you can ask, really. So this mine area is fairly well constructed. You know, it looks just as good as the Valve mine maps from episode 2. My only issue with it really is that too many of the kind of corridors and areas look the same. There's not really enough kind of distinguishing details. I got a little bit lost in this section after a while. There's some nice areas where you can kind of see through kind of grates in the wall to areas you should go to. And then it's just a case of working out how to get there. It's usually a bit of backtracking or something, I found. But yeah, there were some instances where I was like, have I been here before? I really cannot tell. Now, that can be fairly tricky when you've got a kind of limited amount of kind of textures and props you can use in an environment, which I think sums up these mines fairly well. You're kind of limited to these kind of wooden walls and things. It can be tricky to make areas look unique. Normally I kind of tend to kind of shift more towards lighting than anything else in these situations. You can kind of get away with murder with lights in Half-Life games. There's so many options for lighting areas. That's kind of a problem here as well. It's like most of these corridors look the same, but they're also mostly lit the same as well. These kind of dim overhead kind of lanterns. So you probably noticed here I've activated the generator here, and I didn't have any clue what that did. I assumed it's important, but I'm guessing it opened a door to the next area or something like that, but I didn't actually find the door beforehand. So this happens to me so much in custom maps, where you find a button and you press it and, you know, what the hell does it do? What have I just done? I don't understand. Have I just solved a puzzle without actually realising it's a puzzle? And sometimes, you know, if you've got a kind of maze-like environment like this, sometimes players are just going to find stuff out of order. But you can kind of remedy that with the level design itself by just making sure that the player sees the door before they actually have a chance to get to the generator. So in this example here, there's probably a door in that opening I just walked through into this large room. That's probably where the door was, I'm guessing. And I think the solution here would just be to make sure that the player walks up to that opening before they can go anywhere else. So that they see the door, they see that it's locked, and perhaps they even see the generator on the other side of the fence and it's kind of marked out for them. It's now got a little kind of arena combat. And honestly, this was very anemic. This is not a very good arena, unfortunately. It was, I mean, the level design, the setup here is great. So you've got a nice little area, could have had some really fun combat in it, but there's just never enough stuff to kill. It comes at you like one at a time, which is a problem. And from what I can tell, there's only like one wave. It would have been really nice if perhaps you had to, I don't know, wait for something to come down the lift shaft, or perhaps there's a Ramiro lift that takes ages to get to the bottom where you are, and you're kind of trying to survive against zombies until it gets there or something. But yeah, as it stands, that was it. Even look at Norman, even Norman's disappointed. Yeah, sorry buddy. Yeah, it just needed more. I never felt threatened in this arena. More waves would have been great, and perhaps yeah, some sort of time-sensitive thing. So you're waiting for a lift, or you're waiting for something to happen so you can escape. And then the unthinkable happened. Norman suicide. It's too soon, man. Never even got to know you. Unfortunately, I'm way too lazy to go back down there and grab him, so we're just going to have to continue without. Somehow we'll pull through. So I suppose you could call this next area the final or third act to the map. I got really excited when I got on this thing. I thought, oh wow, it's going to be an Indiana Jones segment. And trollolol. Not quite. You can almost see the disappointment on my character as I kind of look around like, oh, is that it? You know, a minecart segment in the mine area would have perhaps been fantastic. Trying to think of other mods that have done that. I'm sure I've played more than one where there's been a kind of great minecart segment in it. So this is kind of the main vista that houses the rest of the combat on this map. It's quite nice actually, I do like it. Nicely constructed. I do like the particle effects in the swamp area there, it looks quite nice. And again, it's just warning the player like, you probably don't want to go down there. Again, you got the clicking from the Geiger counter and everything. One thing I did notice that I was just showing there by zooming is that you can see a kind of seam on the top of the trees in the background there. That's because that's a alpha blended texture, and the way alpha blended textures work in Source is that because of the texture filtering, you can kind of get the bottom of the texture scrolling down onto the top, so you get that kind of green seam at the top of the texture there. So a way to avoid that is to just stretch your texture slightly larger than the brush surface you're covering, so that it doesn't bleed into the top there like that. Pro tip! Getting attacked from all sides here now. So I like the fact, one thing that's quite nice about this map is the gating after you finish an area. Typically something will happen which which makes it so that you cannot go back. So for instance here the force field comes up behind us, which kind of serves two functions. Again, it stops us from going backtracking through the whole level, forces us to carry on forwards, and it also turns that area we walk into a kind of arena for a short moment until we kill the combine enemies. So again, this is another area where unfortunately the level designer had a plan, but I had a different plan, and unfortunately didn't quite take it into account. So there's actually an invisible brush there which stops you from going through, which is because the author intended us to go down here and have a little bit of gameplay in this area. Unfortunately, you can just stack a crate to bypass everything, but it's a case of level designer says no. Which is, I think it's a bit heavy-handed, honestly. I mean, if the player can subvert an entire section of your level just by placing one crate, then I think my argument would be that the level isn't perhaps designed very well in this case. I always say that if the player can come up with a creative solution to a problem, then you should just let them do that. As long as it doesn't feel completely and totally broken. Like, for example, like exploiting bugs in the game or something to do it. I think this is a perfect example of that, where you can just stack a crate to bypass a puzzle. And, you know, it should work. There's absolutely no reason it shouldn't. But the author has seen fit to place a clip brush in front of you, so kind of forces you down here into this gameplay when you've already kind of overcome this area with brain power rather than brawn. Something I try and advocate a lot to newer modders and level designers is try and keep things as open as possible, even in a linear game like Half-Life 2. If you can find ways to let the player kind of come up with their own solutions to problems, then you are doing it right. That's something I encourage, definitely. So we turned off the steam and the clip brush of doom, so we can go back now. Unfortunately, me being me, completely ignore the door in front of me and try and look for ways to get back out here. Yes, try the door, perhaps. This area is quite nice. It's something quite simple but effective. So you walk into a room, it looks empty, so you walk in, and then combine soldiers come out of two different doors on two different sides of the room. It's just a nice way to present a combat situation, I think. Typically, in a lot of mods I see, you walk into a room, there's a bunch of enemies standing around, and you fight. And that can lead to situations where you see them in the room before they see you, then you just kind of stand in the doorway and kill them. Perfect example here. So it's always nice if you can introduce the enemies in a more unique way. It makes combat a lot more interesting. Now another interesting thing about this area is that you see in the vent here, it's actually possible to go into this vent before the enemies see you, and you can kind of attack them from a different angle, which is great. Unfortunately in this playthrough I kind of took the direct route of just open door and kill them all, because there's really no point in doing anything else. It would have been great if perhaps you could go into the vent and as a result, you know, a different combat situation happens. Perhaps you get less enemies, perhaps you get to kill an enemy using an environmental hazard before you engage in combat with the rest of them. Alright, now we're going to make our way across the swamp. Now again, like the arena combat in the mine, this area feels very anemic. It's very, very easy. The enemies generally, again, come at you one at a time. I was really expecting a kind of rush here where you're frantically fighting off zombies on the only bit of safe ground you had. And you're kind of prioritising fast zombies over slow zombies, and there could have been some really interesting gameplay here, but as it stands, it just kind of falls flat, unfortunately. Well, the pacing is just all wrong, basically. It's should have been a lot more hectic than perhaps it is. The interesting bit of gameplay here is that you have a kind of timed mission, I suppose, here, where you can jump onto this island and grab all the supplies before the platform goes far enough away. That was really cool, actually. I did enjoy that little bit of gameplay there. It would have been nice if perhaps there were more sections like that where kind of got this timed risk-reward thing, where if you mess up the timing you have to take a bunch of damage in the slime before you can get back onto the boat. And then we get another vista on this area, which again, it's another thing I like to mention a lot, is if you're going to make a big open, vista like this, which looks really nice, it's usually a good idea to make good use of it. Make sure that it's kind of like a centerpiece for this particular map, or this section of the map that you're in. They take so long to build, and they're so resource intensive, you may as well get good mileage out of them. Now here's an issue I don't like. Let's have a look at this here. Not that. So you'll see here a combined soldier spawned in behind me with a shotgun and came up behind me. This is called back spawning, and if you do this, you are the spawn of Satan. You see it in a lot of games. Doom 3 is probably the classic example. Just stuff coming up behind you with very little warning. You walk into a room, you see a guy in front of you, you start fighting him, and then lo and behold, a bunch of enemies got teleported in behind you without you seeing it, and they kill you. And typically this is used a lot in kind of arena shooters and stuff like that, like a lot of the old Quake games did this as well. But yeah, it just feels very, very cheap. I mean, the fact that it's a shotgun soldier that spawns in as well, it's obvious what the intent was. But yeah, I'm really not a fan of stuff like that. I mean, you can spawn stuff behind the player, but they just need to see it coming. It just feels extremely cheap when you're in combat, you're focused on what's in front of you, and then all of a sudden you take both barrels to the back of the head without even seeing it coming. Yeah, it's not good. So again, we got another kind of timed arena combat here. We're just waiting for the lift to get to the top. This one's actually quite good. You've got plenty of cover. There's a variety of enemies which are trying to take you down. So you've got an interesting kind of gameplay between taking out the manhacks and dodging the combined soldiers. So this was actually quite good. And once again we get the nice view of the vista as we exit the map here. So there we go. I mean, I did enjoy this map. I know it sounds like I had a lot of complaints about it, but I did enjoy it overall. It was just a shame that most of the time it was just the combat that kind of could have been better, I think. Or just more difficult with more enemies. Would have really helped a lot here, I think. And R.I.P. Norman the Gnome, I guess.